Greetings to you wherever you are in the world. My name is Wendy Osborne, Senior Consultant with IAVI. On behalf of IAVI and the Emirates Foundation, I am delighted to welcome you to this fourth session in our virtual Global Forum series. We are delighted to have had over 1,200 people register for the series from over 80 countries. The COVID-19 pandemic has emphasised how volunteers as agents of change provide the practical action that builds hope and resilience, improves lives, and strengthens communities. The pandemic resulted in the postponement of the October 2020 IAVI World Volunteer Conference to be hosted by the Emirates Foundation in Abu Dhabi. The conference will now be held in the autumn of 2021. However, the conference theme chosen for 2020 of volunteering together to enable change and create a better world has never been more relevant or more real. As part of the preparations for the conference, the Emirates Foundation had agreed to support the writing of 7 context papers on the conference sub-themes. Although the conference has been postponed, this project has continued. It aims to provide opportunity for greater consideration of important issues, including with relevance to volunteering and COVID-19. And to enable wider dissemination of knowledge that will add value to those supporting and developing volunteering around the world. The context papers will be published and available between July and December of 2020. The publication of each of these is aligned to the series of virtual global forums. I would like to pay tribute to Helene Perot, Benjamin Haas, and Tony Goodrow, the authors of the context paper associated with today's forum. It is an excellent piece of work and I commend it to you. We hope the forums will be of interest to volunteer involving organisations, academics, policymakers, corporations, volunteers, and indeed anyone interested in volunteering. A copy of the relevant published paper will be provided to each person who registers for a forum, and following each webinar, the paper and the forum recording will be made available to anyone interested. If you missed any of the previous webinars, please go online to access the information. Now to some technical information. On the screen, you will see an overview of the meeting room controls, and there are just a few points to highlight. One, that is if you're having trouble with your computer's audio, try using your phone by selecting phone call under the audio tab. But most importantly, there will be a question and answer session as part of this forum. So send in your questions by using the questions tab. No need to wait to pose questions, you can write them at any time. So as I've said, this is a forum series, and there will be another 3 webinars between now and December. Check out the dates and please put them in your diaries. Today's forum is on the topic of volunteering and the digital world, extending the power of volunteering through new technologies. This is always a highly topical topic, as we seek to maximise what the digital world can offer to add value to volunteering, the volunteer experience, and its impact. COVID-19 has brought into sharp relief the importance of the digital world, and that in itself has also highlighted the global digital divide. These important issues often raise as many questions as answers. I'm therefore delighted that today's moderator comes with the right experience and expertise to lead us through the rest of the forum. James O'Brien is Executive Coordinator of the International Forum for Volunteering in Development, normally known as Forum, a global network of organisations involved in international volunteering. Together, they promote the value of volunteering for development through policy engagement, mutual learning, and by sharing innovative and good practices. Prior to joining Forum, James spent a decade in various roles with voluntary service overseas. So finally, I take this opportunity on behalf of IAVI and the Emirates Foundation to thank you, James, and our other distinguished panel members for your input today. I know this is going to be a great session. So James, it's over to you.
Thank you, Wendy. It's my privilege to welcome you to this forum on what is a very important and timely topic. And we have the privilege of hearing about a really excellent piece of research today from the researchers. And we'll also be hearing from a panel of experts who will help us to delve in more depth into the issues around this topic and to explore it from multiple angles. The research that we're going to hear about today, volunteering and the digital world, extending the power of volunteering through new technologies, is very much situated in our current moment, and it takes into account the impact that COVID-19 is having on the volunteering sector and the renewed urgency to recognise the challenges and the opportunities that are presented by digital technologies and the need to adapt in the current situation. And crucially, it's forward-looking as well. That it poses questions to volunteers and to the organisations that work with and through volunteers around the impact of technology on access to volunteering opportunities, on the relationship between volunteers and the people they work with and serve, and indeed on the role of volunteer involving organisations. And I'm sure we'll be getting into those questions and more over the course of the forum. We're going to hear in a few moments from two of the researchers who produced this paper. We'll then hear from our three panelists. We'll have a poll, and as Wendy mentioned, we'll have a question and answer session as well towards the end of the forum. So please, I would reiterate Wendy's request, be thinking about questions you want to ask and post them in the question box as we go along, so that our panelists can be thinking about them before we get to the Q&A session. But first, it's my privilege to introduce our two presenters on the research. They are Benjamin Haas. Benjamin works as a research associate and a PhD candidate at the Institute of Sociology and Social Psychology in the University of Cologne in Germany. He holds an MA in Cultural Anthropology and Development Sociology from the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. He's worked in development, global education, and international volunteering programs for more than 10 years as a researcher, an evaluator, a program planner, and a volunteer. He's the founding editor of Voluntaris, the Journal of Volunteer Services and Civic Engagement. And Ben is going to be presenting with Tony. So Tony Goodrow is the founder and CEO of Better Impact, a software company that's been helping the nonprofit and governmental sector in over 20 countries since 2001. He's spoken at volunteer sector conferences on 5 continents, including IAVE conferences in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, focusing on topics such as technology trends in the volunteering sector and new perspectives in data collection. He brings to this panel discussion combined insights into present and future technology offerings and the operations of volunteer engaging organizations. I also want to recognize the role of Helene Perold as lead author of this paper, who won't be presenting at this forum. So I'll now hand over to Ben and to Tony to bring us through their paper.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much, James. Thank you, Wendy, for this introduction. We are very delighted to have the opportunity to present our work today to you, volunteering in the digital world. We are Tony from Canada, and I am Ben from Germany. We worked with Helene from South Africa on this paper in a very fruitful cross-continental collaboration. And the first thing I would like to do is to introduce you to the topics that we will be discussing in the next 20 minutes. We are going to start with addressing how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the use of technology in the voluntary sector. Next, we will look at 2 case studies. The first one is on how technology was used to foster active citizenship in Germany. And the second case study is on the PeroSeal, which is a robot packed with artificial intelligence that helps comfort people with degenerative brain illnesses. Moving on from the case studies, I will look at how current and upcoming technologies require us to broaden the definition of volunteerism. And then Tony will share an example from artificial intelligence to demonstrate just one trajectory of where this is headed. And then we'll turn to our panel to look together into the future of the digital world from their perspective. So that's what we planned for you today, and I'll hand over to Tony.
Thanks, Ben. COVID-19 has suspended the whole notion of traveling abroad, including as it relates to international volunteering, with video calls replacing face-to-face meetings and conferences like IAVE's being postponed and somewhat pushed online like today. The need for an investment in communications technology has certainly grown. We have to recognize that this adds yet another reason we need to ramp up efforts to diminish the digital divide between the richer and the poorer regions. This is because aside from all the human suffering that's being caused, of course, not all of the effects of the pandemic are bad ones, especially when combined with some newer technologies. As we've all been forced to adopt new ways of communicating, some are showing promise to augment or even demonstrate advantages over our current processes that might be very well with us for the long haul, long after the pandemic is behind us. At the next IAVI conference, when we are able to get together in person, I would not be surprised if there are some who are able to participate in the conference without traveling, and only because of the new virtual elements that spill over from our experience this year. For some who simply cannot travel internationally and don't have the funds to do so, they may be able to take place and when they otherwise couldn't have. Although the cultural exchange that occurs through international volunteerism is not the same with virtual volunteering, when it replaces a person being there in person, the virtual environment will enlarge the talent pool to include those who can't take the time to travel. As the executive director of the Rwanda Volunteer Network, Archimede Sekamana shared with us, if they need, say, 10 volunteers, they could use 2 on the ground and 8 working virtually. And this may prove to be a great approach, one that combines local talent and perspectives with other talents and perspectives from a broader population that may not have been included pre-pandemic when international volunteering typically had to include travel. Over to you, Ben. Your mic, I think, Ben.
Sorry, you can hear me now. Yes?
Yes.
Sorry for that. We will now present 2 case studies that are not linked to COVID-19, but very vivid examples of how digital technology has shaped and created new forms of volunteering and new possibilities. Our first case study shows how digital technology really has revolutionized the way citizens can exercise their right to freedom of information. Democracy, without a doubt, needs a public sphere and a well-informed, active civil society. So freedom of information is a very important aspect for volunteering and active citizenship as they occur in the public sphere. So the German initiative called Ask the State, an online platform, works in this field of information. The activists at the Open Knowledge Foundation, who runs that platform, argue that if knowledge is power, then open knowledge means empowerment. And here they refer to empowerment of civil society and citizens in order to foster active citizenship. So, for example, citizens or civil society organizations can obtain information via this platform about lobby groups who, let's say, influenced lawmaking processes around climate change, which might be very important strategic information for their activities. Let's look at how this platform works. The foundation built a website called Ask the State, which makes use of the Freedom of Information Act. This is an act that many other countries have signed in the past 20 years. And under this act, every citizen, regardless of the motives, has the right to receive information from government authorities. But usually the bureaucratic jungle that citizens are confronted with oftentimes impeded that citizens exercise this power, this right and this power as well. And this is exactly where Ask the State comes in. On their website, you can select a ministry or any other government authority and request any kind of information. The website puts the request into a pre-formulated letter based on the Freedom of Information Act. So some legal sentences that are important are put in, and then they publish your request and later the answer of the ministry or the respective authority on their platform. As of August 2020, more than 140,000 inquiries have been sent to different authorities via the Ask the State platform. And then the platform is complemented by several quite creative campaigns for more freedom of information in Germany. I want to give you one example. The foundation ran a secret competition to find out which ministry responds fastest to the requests of information. So the activists used their own internet platform to send the same request of information to each of the federal ministries in Germany and publish the results on Twitter. They ran several rounds, and when some ministries discovered this secret competition, they responded in a quite combative spirit. Instead of requiring a couple of weeks or months in which to respond, they answered sometimes even within a day. And I want to show you how the winning ministry responded via Twitter when they found out about their victory. Yeah, so in our paper, we argue that this initiative really represents an outstanding example of creative use of digital technology in the sphere of active citizenship, activism, and volunteering, as the initiative has fundamentally altered the relationship between civil society and the state regarding transparency and freedom of information. Over to you, Tony, for the next example.
Thanks, Ben. The Pero seal is a robot modeled after a Canadian baby harp seal. It makes soft sounds and moves its fins when petted and yelps when handled roughly or held upside down. It blinks when the lights go up, and it opens its eyes at loud noises. Microprocessors under its artificial soft white fur adjust its behavior based on dozens of hidden sensors that monitor sound and light and temperature and touch. It perks up at the sound of its name or praise, and over time, the words that it hears frequently. And because it does all of this wrapped up in a soft artificial fur, it's been proven to reduce wandering, loneliness, agitation, and depression, primarily with people suffering from dementia. But its benefits extend beyond the patient to caregivers as well, whether they are family, a professional healthcare worker, or a volunteer. In speaking with practitioners in the field, it was reported that Pero's calming effect makes the volunteer's job easier. It benefited patients when volunteers were not able to provide emotional support. And sometimes it could even get a positive response from some residents when volunteers or staff were not able to do so. The Pero seal was selected as a case study for 3 reasons. In some cases, it is actually fulfilling the very same role as the primary role in some volunteer positions. In other cases, it is providing an augmentation of the efforts of volunteers who simply now have another tool that they can use. And thirdly, it represents what I call the tip of the iceberg in robotics and artificial intelligence that can be applied in the volunteering sector. A simple search for robot caregivers or robot companions on the internet will give you plenty of examples of work going on in this area. Some of these products have died without getting much traction, but others are gaining significant momentum. And beyond comparisons, or rather companions with caregiving assistants and robotic firefighters are already in use. There's a robotic firefighter that was used in fighting the fire at Notre Dame in Paris in 2019. Drones are being used alongside volunteer lifeguards in Australia to safely deliver life-saving flotation devices to swimmers in peril. And while self-driving cars are not ready for mass use on our roads yet, it seems likely to only be a matter of time when there will be less need for volunteers to drive medical patients or the elderly to their doctor's appointments. Back over to you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. So these were our two case studies. We want to move on now to the field of how to define volunteering, because when we were analyzing how the digital revolution has changed the ways and forms of volunteering in various fields, we identified a couple of trends that challenge traditional definitions of volunteering. Some of those became already apparent in the case studies. They challenge the idea and the understanding of volunteering and also of who is a volunteer, who is a receiver and who is a giver. These traditional boundaries become increasingly blurred in some fields. Think, for example, of a wheelchair user expanding a digital map with information about the accessibility of public places for other wheelchair users. So this user is giver and receiver at the same time. And in general, these kind of very short-term micro-volunteering activities that have become possible through digital technologies have not been recognized by traditional definitions so far. Another trend that we describe in the paper as well is the decentralization of volunteer engagement. Boundaries between volunteering on-site and online are becoming also increasingly blurred. Mobile apps and internet platforms will continue to decentralize this engagement. And although long-term volunteering will still play a central role globally, public action that is organized online in swarms, in flash mobs and networks will become ever more prevalent. Following the 2010 earthquake in New Zealand, for example, and this is where the picture comes from on the slide, a Facebook page called the Student Base for Earthquake Cleanup engaged over 10,000 volunteers to help clean up the city without any central body that organized these activities. So these types of uncoordinated, sporadic, and collective actions have already become very powerful methods of engagement and volunteering. Digital technology makes it possible to embed voluntary work in different aspects of life because it's no longer tied to time or location. And we think that this calls for a broader definition of volunteerism and volunteering, where networks like IAVE could also engage in this discussion. Tony.
Just waiting for the next slide. There we go. Thanks, Ben. When I reviewed the Pero seal case story, I mentioned that it represented a tip of the iceberg. Well, imagine what a future version of Pero might be if it were able to look like a human and converse like a human. What if it could detect small but important changes in mental or physical states while conversing? After the webinar, I encourage you to search robots that look like humans. If you haven't done so lately, you'll be surprised. On the conversational side of things, computers keep getting closer and closer to being able to carry on a conversation with us, and indeed, much more. There's a test known as the Turing test after the man who developed it. And it's a deceptively simple method of determining whether a machine can demonstrate human intelligence. If a machine can engage in a conversation with a human without being detected as being a machine, it has passed the Turing test and it has demonstrated human intelligence. Take a listen to this telephone call and decide for yourself. Who is the AI? Is it the person placing the call, the person answering the call, both, or neither? Go ahead.
So how can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me 1 second. What time are you looking for around? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.? Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for?
Just a woman's haircut for now.
Okay, we have a 10 o'clock.
10 a.m. is fine.
Okay, what's her first name?
The first name is Lisa.
Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Some of you would certainly have picked her out correctly. A number of you likely did not. And it is in the inability for the group to all answer correctly that this example demonstrates the Turing test at work and just how close we are getting. You can hear this phone call again after this presentation or whenever you like by searching by anything such as Google makes a hair appointment. It'll come up. If you do, I encourage you to not only listen to the first call, but also the second one they demonstrate, where the AI calls a restaurant to make a dinner reservation. The person at the restaurant mistakenly interprets the number of people in the requested reservation for the time being requested. But the AI responds appropriately and the conversation stays on track. So as we get to the point where we can deploy a new technology in our volunteer engaging organizations, we need to persistently ask the question, should we? Robocallers placing phone calls looking for support might damage an organized reputation to a greater degree than the money the campaign raises. Self-driving cars, rather than volunteers taking patients to their doctor's appointment, might be criticized for missing the opportunity for a friendly visit from the volunteer. I believe that we should only adopt a new technology where it adds a greater value, however that's measured, but greater than by any other means. I also believe that we should only engage volunteer where the added value created is greater than by any other means. We need to look carefully at this. How can we deploy current and future technologies or not deploy them to better our world? In some cases, the results of volunteer efforts will become greater by teaming up with new technologies. In other cases, the results achieved will become greater by having technology replace the volunteer and fill the role once filled by a volunteer. And hopefully, in more and more cases over time, technology will simply make the need for what a volunteer once did no longer needed. This last point is summed up well by a story of Steve Mann, who is legally blind and has been helping Google test its self-driving cars, actually getting to use the car to get around without anyone else in the car with him. In his words, and I quote, "Going where I need to go in a vehicle without having to make arrangements with other drivers, it just let me be a whole person again." Back to you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. We are almost at the end of our presentation. All these examples and a couple of points that we raised during this presentation, they really hint to the question of in what kind of digital world do we want to live in? So questions of how can we craft the digital world? And in our paper in the last section, we call for the volunteer sector to become more actively engaged in these kind of discussions of data protection, discussions that Tony just raised about artificial intelligence, the digital transformation, neutrality in the internet, hate speech, etc. So all these kind of topics will be very important. And if the volunteer sector and the civil society doesn't want to leave the floor solely to big tech companies. But we would like to end this presentation with a question for our panelists, which I'm sure James will hand over to them later, which is, and it's also an invitation to our listeners and the participants, how do you envision the future of volunteering in a digital world? how should the digital world be crafted in order to be a good world for the volunteer sector? So I thank you very much also on behalf of Tony, and we are happy for your questions, to answer your questions, and looking forward to the comments of the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Tony, for a really fascinating presentation. I'm sure I'm not the only person on the call who really wants a Paro seal now, having heard about the excellent work that they're doing. I would encourage everyone on the call as well to seek out the paper. It's on the IAVE website, and to read more about the work that Tony and Ben have done in this area. I now want to introduce the remainder of our panelists. So we have another three experts who are going to be joining us for the rest of our conversation. First, we have Giselle Mendez. Giselle is a volunteer innovator and the founder and managing director of the Volunteer Centre of Trinidad and Tobago. This volunteer centre is a unique Caribbean-based platform which connects people to high-impact, custom-built interventions supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. VCTT believes in the transformational power of people, and it creates an all-inclusive space for citizens to be activated and meaningfully engaged in pioneering viable solutions in support of their vision, a volunteer in every home. We also have Deedar Guerra, who has been a volunteer since 2009, when he founded a CBO called Adesso in Mozambique. In 2015, he began an active collaboration in revitalizing the National Volunteering Council of Mozambique, where he serves now as vice president. At CNV, he's led the design of their plans and projects, as well as coordinating and implementing at the national level, ensuring the mobilization and management of volunteers. And finally, we have Padma Dayananda. Padma is the CSR Outreach Lead for Cognizant UK and Continental Europe. Her primary focus is on bridging the opportunity gap through social digital empowerment, through delivering digital education and digital education to a spectrum ranging from primary schools, youth employability initiatives, and pro bono services to charities, advising them on how they can use digital capabilities to service their beneficiaries better. And she is the recipient of multiple awards in that area. So we're very pleased to have these three additional panelists, and I'd like to call on each of them to just speak for about 5 minutes to give us a sense of what's important to each of you in this area. So first I'd ask Giselle to share with us.
Thank you very much, James, and of course my colleagues, representatives from IAVE, for facilitating a space where we can also add our voice to this very important discussion. So at the Volunteer Centre of Trinidad and Tobago, our organizational work is very much centered upon connecting people to high impact interventions which support the Sustainable Development Goals. Underpinning this 2030 agenda, of course, is the principle of leaving no one behind. However, I'm sure everyone would agree, COVID-19 has added and will continue to add a new layer of complexities and challenges to this ambitious and complex mandate. So when we speak about volunteering and the digital world, our mandate to leave no one behind must be reviewed with a deeper urgency. In that vein, I believe our new thrust as we explore prospects for volunteering and the digital world can include 4 pillars. The first pillar, amplify the good. The second one, reduce the risks. Third one, bridge the gap. Fourth one, strengthen our commitment to data collection and measurement. To just give some context in terms of amplifying the good, one of VCTT's flagship interventions this year, which has gone virtual due to COVID, is the Me2We e-mentorship program, where using technology through tablet devices, we have facilitated the connection of 30 skilled volunteers entering intimate spaces, i.e. homes, of 30 highly vulnerable young people in Trinidad and Tobago. In a time when this is required most, we all understand the mental health challenges and also the issues with most young people being home from school, and that transition to online is now underway in Trinidad and Tobago. So in a time when globally access has been restricted, technology is breaking the barriers of space and time. A second really important pillar, reducing the risks. So for this same e-mentorship intervention, which of course is a youth-centered program, the issue of safeguarding and child protection is paramount for us as a volunteer involving agency, and we're using technology to help combat and execute as far as feasible our safeguarding and child protection mandate. So currently we're using Zoom and Otter to record and transcribe every session between a volunteer mentor and a young person within their homes. So there is transparency in terms of that interaction and what is taking place on a weekly basis. Currently, as an organization, we're also assessing different solutions we can use for analyzing these sessions, which we have transcribed, so that we can more effectively leverage our mandate in terms of building a case for mentorship and volunteerism and really understanding what is taking place in those sessions online. The third pillar I mentioned before, of course, is bridging the gap. And it has been mentioned several times throughout, but it really is a big issue. The digital divide is real, and digital equity must be a cornerstone of our approach. On this point, I consider an agricultural intervention VCTT is rolling out this year, which also had to evolve online. It's called the Grown in East Port of Spain intervention. However, due to the context of the community we're working with, their limited resources and facilities, by participating family members in terms of access to internet. Also, some of our families we're working with, it is an elderly population, so there isn't that level of knowledge as it pertains to even accessing internet online and so forth. So what we have done and what we're currently exploring as an organization is actually using screens, which we will be setting up in each of the communities to live stream the agricultural training direct from the farms that we are working with, so the communities are still able to access content. So we're not able to actually mobilize resources to provide the technology infrastructure that's needed per family, but on a community level, we're using screens to still see if we can coordinate that content and that information reaching them. The last pillar I would mention, of course, is regarding strengthening our commitment to data collection. I'm sure we would all agree this is new territory for all of us. And within that, our mandate to measure and analyze the impact of digital volunteering with specific emphasis on the Global South must be high on our agenda. The last State of the World Volunteerism report really did underscore the continued challenges, especially for us as representatives in the Global South, in terms of really having that quantitative and qualitative understanding of what is happening in a voluntary sphere. So there is opportunity to understand how we can leverage technology to bridge some of those gaps. So those are my main points at this point. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Giselle, and we look forward to hearing more in the Q&A. I'd now ask Deedar to unmute and share with us, please. Deedar.
Oh, thank you, James. First, I'm grateful for this opportunity. So thank you very much, Ayave. And as a Portuguese speaker, I also thank for this gesture of inclusion, which coincidentally was the theme of the previous forum. And I apologize in advance for the low level of my English. And as I will be speaking almost on behalf of Africa and Mozambique as well, and to enrich my contribution in this session, I sought to explore the perspective of other volunteer leaders, both in Mozambique and across the continent. So I also thank them for their rich contributions. Well, in fact, digitalization has been very important in the volunteer sector. Just to give some examples, for example, here in Mozambique, we have the volunteer law and regulation. It's an instrument that was designed by online volunteers. So it's a very concrete product. But we also have some new programs due to the COVID-19, like My Talent Starts at Home, Safe and Productive Confinement, and now VSO is also piloting a pairing of international volunteers, experts with national volunteers on the ground through remote connection and support. But you will also have, for example, in Rwanda, anti-epidemic robots, which are monitoring patients, delivering food and medication. While in Nigeria, we have free e-consultation tools, which are helping Nigerians to self-assess infections, risk, and get tested based on symptoms. The African Union is developing a COVID-19 volunteer response toolkit, and at the same time, they are also trying to boost the implementation of the volunteer linkage platform. So all of these are some examples happening so far in Africa. So you can see that digital offers a fantastic opportunity to create international youth cooperation, for example, and enable knowledge sharing at a global scale, while youth focus on acting locally. A kind of think and learn globally, but act locally. So this is in line with the SDGs and the 2063 agenda of the African Union. So the point is increasing traditional forms of labor, including volunteering, are being impacted positively by technology. And COVID-19 has shown that thanks to the digital world, we can cut on travel costs, reduce face-to-face meetings, and still achieve our goals, which will allow to have more financial resources, for instance, for projects that benefit communities and also have a positive impact on the environment in general and climate change in particular. However, in Africa, several weaknesses that have been made more evident thanks to COVID-19 regarding technology. For example, I remember that during the Global Technical Meeting on volunteering in past July, a colleague, Samuel Turai from Sierra Leone, was unable to make his speech because of internet troubles. And also in Mozambique and throughout Africa, there have been several situations in which volunteers are unable to use platforms like Zoom, webinar, due to lack of smartphones or computers, weak domain of the application, or financial inability to pay for the internet. So these are among several examples that characterize Africa, where even illiteracy is still a big challenge. The majority of population lives in rural areas, in mud houses, with no electricity and infrastructure like fiber or Wi-Fi. Just to bring here some figures, according to statistics, in 2019, the continent internet penetration was 39% compared to 62% globally. So this ties back into in its existing digital divide, which is pronounced by, for example, Kenya has almost 90% of internet access, while Burundi has only 5.3%, and my country has 17%. Even in terms of mobile downloads, the speed is 3 times slower than the rest of the world. Then we have the challenge of the costs and what we can say digital illiteracy. So these are some challenges that we are facing here in Africa. Even myself, I had to come to the office to participate in this meeting because my internet at home is weak and the cost is very, very high. So COVID-19 has shown that the value of digitalization, but also a stark reminder of the remaining digital divide. Therefore, considering that more than 90% of volunteer work in Africa is informal, and taking into account that most of our volunteers serve people at grassroots, for example, in delivery of masks, food, humanitarian aid, and other interventions that require their physical presence, I think we should consider the advantage of technology from 2 angles. First, digital world as a channel to create more opportunities for people who can move to take an assignment due to work reasons, disability, etc., to volunteer part of their time. Of course, while this could be partial a factor of inclusion for people who are with disability, for example, for instance, it can also exclude many potential volunteers because of the digital divide. The second is volunteers can help close the digital divide by transferring knowledge and technology to poor remote communities or illiterate people who would not normally have access to the digital world. No. So according to IMF research, expanding internet access in sub-Saharan region by an extra 10% of population could increase real per capita GDP growth by 1 to 4%. Therefore, recognize that much of the new normal imposed by COVID-19 will be the future normal. It's necessary and urgent that government in Africa prioritize investment in digitalization in all sectors. For example, Egypt, Mauritius, and now Rwanda can be a good example of this, where through the Ministry of ICT and Innovation, there has been accelerated adoption of e-learning, e-commerce, especially in small and medium enterprises. So, and all the volunteering activities are gaining another dynamic with this wave of digitalization. So
I might ask you to wrap up there, Deedar, if you don't mind.
Yes. So I have only 3 recommendations. So there is a need of investment in terms of infrastructure. This includes expanding coverage and quality of internet and electricity. Capacity building, so we're talking about digital literacy and availability of electronic equipment. And last, affordable costs, including apps that work offline. So this is my humble contribution regarding this interesting topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deedar. Thank you for bringing an African perspective even beyond Mozambique. And I'm sure we'll pick up on the point about the digital divide in our Q&A session. I'd now like to call on Padma to unmute and to share briefly, please.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Ben and Tony. Enjoyed your paper. I love the mention of knowledge is power, and open knowledge means empowerment. That's really powerful, because I think knowledge networking is the key area that digital technology can support to empower those who are extremely marginalized. So coming to what I had to say, I couldn't resist commenting on that paper. Coming from a digital services company, we have always believed that digital enablement is our way to lead for a client or community to improve everyday life is our purpose. Using digital technology to increase access to education, healthcare, and accelerate social mobility in resource-poor communities is something we strongly believe in, and we have designed a volunteering program centered around this. The pandemic has made apparent how every country is equally vulnerable to the forces of nature, irrespective of the political, economic, or military power. This has led to greater empathy. It's not somebody else's problem anymore. It's lent more impetus to work together towards a common goal. So when a single focus team, where the focus is to support local communities, where volunteering our skills and time, the last 6 pandemic-driven months have been a revelation. We at Cognizant Outreach knew that this was the time when our communities needed us most, and we could not let lockdown to stop us from doing what had to be done. Being a digital services company, the natural response was to apply digital to our services and convert the challenge to an opportunity and reach as far and wide as possible, not limited by boundaries. We creating Cognizant Assist, a free platform to support community volunteering in COVID times, or training 5,000 teachers to adopt online platform in the last 3 months for teaching and engaging students, or inspiring 100+ students through our WeWork or virtual work experience program. It has been a phenomenal story of digital transforming volunteering. Digital has been a key player of dissolving borders and bringing people together for the greater good, and digital has always been there. And it's always in the last 10 years, Zoom was there, Microsoft Teams was there, WebEx was there, but we've never delved into the true power of all of that. And I think COVID made us do it. So professionals in Cognizant UK, Singapore, and India today use these platforms and are connecting virtually with social impact partners across countries to provide digital solutions using Salesforce, Microsoft Excel, and Agile methodologies. We know that most of the nonprofits are struggling with their funding or never had the opportunity to focus on their IT abilities. And we thought this is the space we wanted to empower people who are actually delivering results on the ground. Human resource professionals in a UAE office connected with candidates with hearing impairment in Mumbai to conduct mock interviews to help them become job ready, because many of them are now going to be attending interviews online. So they had to overcome their disability and also overcome the disability posed by the circumstances. And what the digital environment has brought together is a cross-cultural, cross-continental connects. And it has brought in the expertise of the top-notch professionals to the fore. So when there was a request for search engine optimization in the UK, we just had to put out the request, and it could be addressed by somebody sitting in Mumbai or Singapore for this particular charity, and we could deliver it over a few days. But it has also expanded the limited exposure the beneficiaries had. The experience has been equally enriching for the volunteers, helping them gain a deeper understanding of socioeconomic issues in regions besides their own, and inspiring innovative solutions customized to different geographies. So we had volunteers from India conducting sessions for teachers in the UK. So that is completely dissolving those boundaries which we had, and now we realize was all in our mind. Digital volunteering has also succeeded in bringing together volunteers who earlier were constrained by time and distance to do on-field service. They had the intent, they had the good heart in the right place, but they couldn't make time to do it or get out to the field. Cognizant has validated the power and need for technology solutions more than any other crisis ever has. I think this is just the beginning of a volunteering revolution, I think. And digital is going to be leading this revolution, especially for our Gen Z and the Gen Alpha volunteers who are really coming up to the field. It'll be interesting to watch that, them taking center stage. But we have to be completely cognizant of the fact that as much as we're bridging gaps, there are going to be new gaps, and we have to be extremely aware of these and address whatever we do, keeping these gaps in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Padma, and thank you to all of our panelists. Before we move to the open Q&A session, we want to hear from you. So we have 176 people on the call, which is fantastic, and we have two very quick polls that we want to run. Before I turn on the polls, I'll just say that they're connected. So the options to choose in each of the polls are the same for poll number 1 and poll number 2. And we're going to ask two questions. The first is, what technology or trend do you think holds the most promise for advancing the volunteer sector? And the second is, what technology or trend do you think represents the biggest threat to the volunteering sector? So and this is testing my ability to run the technology. If I can launch the first poll there, we'll just take 30 seconds and ask you to choose. So the question there, what technology or trend do you think holds the most promise for advancing the volunteering sector? And I can see results coming in. I guess I should respond myself as well. I'd encourage you, just while the poll is running as well, to be thinking about questions. We're getting great questions through on the Q&A function. I'm not allowed to vote. It seems it's for attendees only, so that leaves me out. We've just hit 30 seconds there, so I think I can close the poll, and I think also I can share the results. So you should be able to see the results of the poll on the screen. Just before we launch into the second poll, I see ad hoc engagement via social media has come out very strongly, and very few votes there for robotics, driverless cars, or poor seal, or for online rating platforms. Just before we launch into the poll, the second poll, anything there that is surprising to our panelists very quickly, or anything that you think kind of reinforces what you expected to come through on the poll, or your own views?
Well, in case of
Tony, if they were your questions.
might throw in that robotics and driverless cars is perhaps not surprising, because it's hard to imagine some of the things that we talk about when we think about a car driving all by itself, or a robot walking into a building unassisted. But Bill Gates said something that I think matters here. We overestimate the changes that technology will bring in the next 2 years by a long shot. And we underestimate what technology will change and bring to us in the next 10 years by a long shot. That's not a word for word quote, but it's the gist of it. And I think that I think it's just our exposure to these things leaves this as such a low percentage. But let's ask this question again, perhaps at the IIV conference in the fall of 2021, and with a few more driverless cars on the road, let's see if that percentage changes.
Thanks so much, Tony. We'll move now to poll number 2. So we're asking the same. We have the same options that you can select from, but the question this time is, what technology or trend do you think represents the biggest threat to the volunteer sector? And I think we got a sense of some possible threats to certainly threats to business as usual through the presentations earlier on. We'll give about 30 seconds for this one as well. I think that point you raised, Tony, is a good one. Perhaps we're more likely to see the potential in technology that we're familiar with, things like social media, than we are things that seem like they're further down the pipeline. We'll just take another few seconds. I see almost half of people have voted. Great. So once again, I'll share the results. So you should be able to see the results on the screen. And this time around, quite different as you'd expect. So the greatest threat there being artificial intelligence, and then more or less joint second, robotics, driverless cars, and ad hoc engagement via social media. So interesting to see that that one rated relatively highly on this one, as well as leading the first poll. Any quick reflections from our panelists on those results? Anything surprising? Anything that doesn't surprise you at all?
I think artificial intelligence has been a threat to everything, right? We have been perceiving it as a threat to jobs. We've been perceiving a threat to humanity. We're perceiving threat to our safety. We think we are talking about like a robotic apocalypse, right, taking over the world. So that fear is there. But I think we learn to adapt to technology, right? Who thought Zoom would be part of our life 3 or 6 months back? I don't think even our parents or grandparents would have been happy connecting with Zoom, but they have adapted because when they realize the value of it. I think artificial intelligence needs to come with the checks and balances. It can be extremely empowering for the volunteering sector.
Yeah, thanks so much, Padma. I'm keen to move on. We have about 10 minutes now for Q&A. And I might start with you, Padma, if that's okay. And the question I'd like to put to you is, how do you envision the future of volunteering in a digital world, and how should that digital world be crafted?
So I don't want to repeat what I stated earlier about what we do, and most of our volunteering, which is about 3.4 million volunteering hours, was all in-person, on-site volunteering until the advent of COVID and the circumstances surrounding that. And it is amazing how fast and efficiently the volunteers reoriented to virtual volunteering. They created opportunities where there were apparently none, and went on to leverage digital like never before. It could be empowering teachers, upskilling them, teaching underprivileged children using smartphones, getting smartphones collected from people and delivering it to students. All of that. The common thread across all these activities has been the power of digital. Digital has come to define a way forward in volunteering. Though the power and experience of being in the field is irreplaceable, through digital transformation, I envision volunteering that is not limited by boundaries, driven by innovation and expanding. However, we need to be cautious. That is the destination we should aspire for. The journey is a meandering one, dependent on the access or availability, the awareness, the ability and adoption of technology by communities. there is a risk of broadening the divide between the haves and have-nots, and some falling through the gap. Like the elderly who are generally resistant to adopting change and relished human contact through volunteers are at risk of struggling with loneliness. Rural communities that had hope for change with international resident volunteers may not experience the same support through virtual volunteers. So the digital world needs to be crafted predicting these gaps. Private sector organizations need to play a decisive role in defining and building the digital ecosystem that can facilitate newer opportunities and faster delivery. And by ecosystem, we mean not just develop infrastructure on the benefactor side, but also creating a thriving digital environment for the beneficiaries from all strata of economy. There must be creative collaboration between diverse organizations, technology companies, universities, entrepreneurs, non-profits, government, internet service providers, small businesses, retail giants, to address the 4 A's: access, awareness, ability, and adoption. That way, when we emerge on the other side of the crisis, we'll be a more well-knit and more empowered and enabled society ready to take on or harness the power of digital.
Thanks so much, Padma. So it seems like there needs to be much more cross-sectoral connections, perhaps, and that we need to be reaching beyond even the group in this conversation to make this work, and that there is a job to be done in projecting into the future as to what the gaps and opportunities will be in order to be able to make the most of them. I'm going to put a slightly different question to Deedar. Deedar, can I ask you, what do you see as a positive outcome or positive development that's been triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic regarding the digital world and volunteering, based on the work that you're seeing?
Yeah, well, I think it was another challenge that we had to adapt. We had to show our resilience because we had an agenda and we have people. Because when we are volunteers, we are serving people. So those people are being affected, and we have some rules from the government that must be followed. So we realized that we should only do that by technology. But going in bring a deep analysis, I think it was the conclusion that we can cut some costs, but still achieving our results. So I think it was an opportunity to open a road, because all of us, as I said, Padmas, we had Zoom. Maybe 3 months ago, we didn't have, nobody was using Zoom, but now we need to use Zoom. So it was a new normal. So it was an opening of a new reality that we can't go back. So in terms of advantage, this is what I can say about the advantage from COVID-19.
Thanks so much, Deedar. And Giselle, we had a question that was put specifically to you based on what you mentioned in your opening remarks. The question was, firstly, great idea to mitigate safeguarding risks by recording all Zoom interventions between volunteer mentors and children. But how do you manage data protection and confidentiality risks of having those recordings, especially when they involve children? How has that been managed on your side?
Great question. I mean, I think very often, if we think about going virtual, we may think it's simply about technology tools and whatnot, but it really requires a full ecosystem to ensure that it's effective, it's safe, and of course, impactful. So even in terms of our organization, where 2 of our interventions have gone virtual, or one has a huge virtual component, a lot of what we've done internally at VCTT has had to evolve. So our safeguarding and child protection policy had to expand to reflect this new virtual mode. Our data management systems also had to evolve. So we had to invest in storage that would facilitate the safe storage of all of these these sessions between our volunteer mentors, as well as the mentee sessions with the young people. Additionally, as well, creating that level of education and awareness and buy-in with parents was also a big initial step we had to take, so that they understood not just simply that their child would be connecting with this strange person, this mentor online, but also understanding the rationale for the recording of the session. So there was that level of buy-in in terms of the recordings, in addition to which we really asked for persons, all volunteers, to sign code of conducts around privacy and so forth. So it's really about creating that ecosystem that supports an effective and also a safe virtual approach. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Giselle. I might just suggest that we might run 5 minutes over, if that's okay with our panelists and our attendees as well. So we'll take about another 5 minutes for Q&A. We had a question from the floor that's sort of a natural follow-on to that one, Giselle, which is, what types of innovative ways have been identified to effectively support and supervise volunteers using technology? So how are we supporting and how are we supervising technologies using volunteers using technology? I wonder, Padma or Deedar, have you any experience of this or any insights that you can share? Or indeed, Tony or Ben?
Yeah, sorry, Deedar, if you want to go ahead.
It was a big challenge in case of Mozambique at CNV because we are, according to what I said, our reality is difficult, but we have, for example, some basic platforms like WhatsApp, and we also developed some tools in partnership with some organizations to measure this impact, but also to put in place some guiding rules inspired from the global standards, for example, developed by Forum. So it was a big challenge, but because we have a very good network across the country, so we have something more organized. But one of the mechanisms that we adopted was to be linked with the, for example, health authorities, in order to ensure that the volunteers are doing everything in line with the guidelines. So it is still a big challenge, but we are adapting our, how can I say, we are improving day by day. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Deedar. Did you want to come in as well, Padma?
Yeah, just want to add, I know it's different in different countries, the safeguarding rules. So in the UK, we obviously had to do a few more things, like when we had a ground rule, we will not record any sessions which involved children. And when we didn't have any one-to-one sessions, even if it is a mock interview or a mentoring session, we would make sure there are 2 volunteers at any point of time. That was managed by technology. So if the one dropped out, we would be triggered and we would immediately ensure that somebody else logs in. We will ensure that the other volunteer drops out as well. We also had some sessions with schools where we had lots of children in the class and we are interacting with children from India. So which were done earlier before the COVID restriction, where Indian school children were also in school. So we didn't have to consider the safeguarding there because the 2 classes of children were interacting and we had staff. But when we started this program, we realized that the children in India were in their homes. And hence we didn't know who else could be in the home watching children in the UK. So then we had to, on the fly, convert and say the children will sit at a distance from the camera in the UK, and the teacher will front end the children. So we had to do a lot on the feet thinking sometimes to adapt to these situations. But yes, yeah, some ground rules was restricting recording and one-to-one sessions at any point of time involving children.
Thanks, Padma. Do you want to come in on this as well, Tony?
Yeah, and it's what I've seen is a growth in the number of online training and learning platforms. Some are even built into volunteer management software, but it's one of those things that I think will benefit the whole sector long after the pandemic, is that out of necessity, we've come to need to train our volunteers online. It's become more structured in that process. And I think in that structure, now that the content is being created, that it will be reused and repurposed long after the pandemic, and our volunteers will be more prepared to do the roles that we choose for them.
That's great. Thanks, Tony. I'm conscious of the time, so we might just take one final question. It's a theme that's, I think, bubbled up over the course of the conversation around the digital divide. And the question is this: how does the emergence of digital technology and volunteering risk increasing the digital divide, both for volunteers and for the people they serve. I know, Ben and Tony, this is something that you addressed in really great detail and a lot of nuance, I thought, in the paper. So Ben, do you want to tackle this one first, and then if there's anyone else who wants to come in afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I can answer this particular question, but in general, I think and we talk about it in the paper, and we've seen what Deedar also has commented. The digital divide really is a huge topic, alongside with questions of how authoritarian contexts influence the use of digital technology. I mean, the example I showed from Germany is a very nice example, but in other kind of more authoritarian contexts, it wouldn't work in the same manner. So all these big questions and the digital divide within countries and also between countries, not only talking about availability, but also about awareness, affordability, and all these other topics. We put the rating platforms into the poll because we also think that the whole question of what is the actual goal of big tech companies who run all these social media platforms. I mean, we all know that they are not there for us to be active as civil society. They are there to make money. And what in the end, I mean, what I think is our biggest argument here in the paper is that we think the volunteer sector and civil society has to become more engaged in all these questions and not leave it to political discussions only or to company discussions, the private sector. And this is really something where a lot of people are already doing great work, but these are big topics for the next decade to discuss.
Thanks so much, Ben. I think we probably have one minute left in our Q&A. So if anyone else wants to come in on the question of the digital divide with some quick comments.
Yeah, I would like to add to that in terms of there are a lot of assumptions which kind of which need to be validated. So we think that every in a first world country, a developed country like UK, online teaching should go seamlessly. Like all children should have access, whereas we focus a lot on providing devices and all in countries like India. But we realized through lockdown that the divide was there within this society as well. Even in a developed country, there is a huge divide. So we need to address the access part in terms of them having devices. And then if you provide devices, many children live in accommodation where there is no internet facility. So when there is a push for, don't open schools, let's continue with online teaching, we forget this whole segment of children who are already struggling with social mobility, and that means they're going to miss the life chance because of this gap. So and that is where I was talking about ecosystem of collaborations between different organizations, right? Universities to retail to corporates, because everyone can fit and address one of these A's. In the affordability or in the access or awareness, everyone has something to do. So I think that collaboration is very important, and I think COVID is a good time to bring that one empathetic support, because now it's not, we are not just my problem, right? Everyone has realized that we cannot turn a blind eye to a problem somewhere in the world. It's going to hit us at some point of time.
Thank you so much, Padma. Thank you also, Deedar, Giselle, Tony, and Ben, for a really fantastic conversation. I think it's one that could run, and I'm sure we'll be picking it up in other spaces. Thanks also to all of our attendees for your interest, for your questions, and I'm sure this will be picked up in IAVE conference next year and other spaces as well. This is a conversation that isn't going to end here. Just a few pieces of business. The next in this series of forums is on October 28th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, which is GMT -4, and it's on corporate volunteering, delivering business objectives through a value-focused mission. So please put that in your diaries. I'll say also that the recording of this session is going to be up online tomorrow. So if you're interested in listening back or sharing it with your colleagues, it'll be on the IAVE website. And I'll say again for the last time, I do highly recommend Ben and Tony's paper. It's on the IAVE website. Go seek it out. And finally, despite the fact that I'm the director of Forum, I'm going to say join IAVE, become an advocate for volunteering worldwide, join a network of volunteering leaders at iave.org/join-now. So thank you to all our panelists, our attendees. Thank you also to IAVE and to the Emirates Foundation, and hopefully we'll see you at the next forum. Take care, stay safe, bye-bye.
Thank you.